movie, I think is meant pretty much as a joke. You can't really take much of this seriously. And that's why it's so entertaining. For me, over the years, this film has been, thank you. Oh, look at that.
You gotta be a little bit clean.
I appreciate it. To me, this film, this is so much better, thank you. It's like The Wizard of Oz or The Maltese Falcon. Some of these movies where you can just, if it's on late at night, it's a movie that's hard to switch channels or to not watch, but the rest of the film really. That's been my experience. For some people, it's a Wonderful Life. Maybe not so much for me. For me, it would be more like maybe No Country for Old Men. But this movie, North by Northwest, is a movie that I've seen so many times and have taught it so many times. So if you allow me, it'll help me just to get some things, to drop some knowledge on you, as they say in Hamilton, and give you some facts about the film, about the making of the film. And by all means, feel free to ask me anything you want or bring up any observation about the film you want. First of all, this film, AFI, American Film Institute, in the top 100 thrillers, this is number 4, at least on the latest polls. Sight and Sound, British magazine, every 10 years they do a poll of the greatest movies ever made. On the last one, the most recent one, 2 or 3 years ago, North by Northwest came in number 45. BBC, their 100 greatest American movies, North by Northwest came in number 13. In the Writers Guild of America, the 100 greatest screenplays, this screenplay was written by Ernest Lehman, and it was the only original screenplay he ever wrote or that was made for the movies. He won Oscars for musicals like The Sound of Music and West Side Story, but he had never done an original screenplay. It came in, or at least on the recent poll, it came in number 21. But the thing that's probably most interesting about where North by Northwest falls into categories, in the recent GQ poll of the best suits in film history, Cary Grant's gray suit, which every time I see this movie now, I become more and more focused on the suit, less on him. Although he's a hard person not to watch, but the suit is iconic in this film, and it's the best suit in film history, according to GQ. Now, before I start talking more about this movie, and since I brought up the part about Cary Grant's suit, there is a short story I want to direct you to. It's easy to find on the internet. It's a great meta short story called Cary Grant's Suit by an author named Todd McEwen. It's about 10 pages long, and it treats the entire movie from the point of view of the suit. He's not just a suit. And you follow the movie from scene to scene to scene based on the suit's appearance. And it has almost a magical power, the suit. I mean, it goes through a lot. Think of all the things, the physical abuse that happens to Cary Grant. I mean, not the least being machine gunned by a crop duster. And the suit turns out okay. I mean, it gets one pressing afterwards. So anyway, I recommend that short story to you. I want to tell you, okay, so I mentioned the fact that the only time the suit gets ruffled is at the crop duster sequence. So I want to, before we turn this over to discussion or questions, I want to talk about the crop duster sequence. To me, this is maybe the second most iconic scene in Hitchcock's filmography. He made literally 55 to 60 feature films, and his career spanned, from the 1920s to the 70s. It's half a century. And that's why he made so many movies. He was so incredibly prolific. And And so I kind of grew up with Hitchcock, and the books that I brought, I used in my class, but I wanted to talk about the crop duster sequence in relation to this book. This is I have 100 Hitchcock books, but the first book I ever got has, this was 1969 from my mother and father. To Sammy with love, Mama. God, I can't remember. I barely remember when I called her Mama. Mama and Daddy, December 1969. So I was 10 years old, and I became obsessed with this book, and I hadn't seen any Hitchcock films. This is sort of like my ABC book. And I started following all his films without the ability to see the films, because the films were not shown in theaters. There were no repertory theaters like the Independent Picture House. There was no Turner Classics. Maybe if I lived in New York, you could have seen it in the theater there. So very infrequently would come on television, Hitchcock films. So I had the TV Guide, if you remember that. And Charlotte only had 3 channels. For those who grew up in Charlotte like I did, it was Channel 3, CBS, Channel 9, NBC, Channel 18, ABC, and 42 was PBS. And I lived and died by the TV Guide. When is a Hitchcock film going to be shown? And I had never seen North by Northwest, and I knew the book backwards and forwards. I knew that I needed to see this movie because of that crop duster sequence. There's big photographs in the book. So I saw that the film was being played. This happened literally 56 years ago. And I was excited. North by Northwest is going to be on TV. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, $1 million movie, or whatever they called it then. So it was a big deal. I planted myself in front of the TV. The movie came on. The scene where she sends him off from the train station, you see the bus pull up from that long shot. And then the very next day, he's running toward the gasoline truck, and the truck blows up. The entire... I have to study my nerves. It was traumatic. I called up so I went to my mother. I was in tears. I wanted to see the crop duster sequence. She said, "This is the point where you need, take charge, call the television station, and ask to speak to the station manager and complain." So, I was 11 years old. So I was really terrified, and I did it. It was like Dorothy walking toward the Oz, and they actually put the station manager on, and I said, "What happened to the crop duster sequence?" He said, "Well, we only had 2 hours because of the commercials, and we decided in order to make time for the next show, we had to eliminate a sequence, and we took that one out." Which is like taking the shower scene out of Psycho. And I wouldn't let him get it. I said, why? I've been waiting for this. Why didn't you take the kissing scene out? I said, that scene went on pretty long. So anyway, that's sort of my Rosebud moment. And as a result of that experience, we had a regular 8 or Super 8 project camera. A lot of families had home movies and their own regular 8 camera. At least we did. Anyway, so every time there was a Hitchcock movie, I would I would put on the lights. I would load up my camera, and I would film the iconic scenes, like the shower scene from Psycho, or where the birds attack the schoolhouse and the birds, and the crop duster sequence in North by Northwest. I would actually film it with my camera, my regular 8 camera. Then I would get it developed, and then run the film through my viewfinder and watch these scenes and figure out how they were made. I was 11 or 12. And I think that's the moment. Then I went on later on to teach 30 years of Hitchcock. But I think I directed that moment when they cut the crop duster sequence out. And I decided I'm never going to let this happen again. And I'm going to film every scene and examine it. And, obviously now you just you take out your phone, YouTube, and hit crop duster sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, life has changed over the last 50 years. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned that even to my wife and sister. But I thought it was apropos today. And why don't we, so that's a great segue for the crop duster sequence. I think it would help you to understand that Hitchcock, when he conceived this movie, before it was ever North by Northwest, the very first thing that popped into his mind, like 5 years before the screenplay was ever written for North by Northwest, was, wouldn't it be neat to have a movie where two people are chasing each other across the faces of Mount Rushmore? And he hired a screenplay writer, Ernest Lehman. He said, work on that. That's all I'm gonna give you. Two people chasing each other across Mount Rushmore. I don't know who those people are, why they're there, but there must be a reason. Make a screenplay about that. Also, he said, I'm also obsessed with a person alone in an enormous field or prairie, with no protection, nowhere to hide, and possible death comes from the sky. I want you to come up with a scenario, maybe connected to the Mount Rushmore sequence, hopefully, with the same characters, and come up with that. So he had an art director, Robert Boyle. I had all this. Okay, here we go. So he talked to the screenplay writer, and he said Hitchcock approved of all the work. He said at some point the director told Lehman, the screenplay writer, I've always wanted to do a scene in the middle of nowhere, where there is absolutely nothing. You're out in the open, and there's nothing all around you, nowhere to hide. The camera can turn around 360 degrees, and there's nothing there but one man standing alone, because the villains who are out to kill him have lured him out to this lonely spot. Suddenly a tornado comes along. And Robert Boyle says, but Hitch, how did the villains create a tornado? And Hitchcock says, I have no idea. Well, he said, what if it's a plane that comes out of the sky? And Hitchcock says, yes, it's a crop duster. We plant crops nearby, and I see crop dusters all the time. And that's how that whole thing came about. Now, that was years before the screenplay was written. So just to put a cherry on top of this, Hitchcock was going through quite a run in the 1950s. I mean, this is his golden era. Originally, this entire film series was just going to be his Technicolor masterpieces of the 1950s, and it expanded a little bit from that. But I still think this is his greatest decade. Just in the late 50s alone, when he made this film North by Northwest, think of the 4 or 5 films he made in a row right during this movie. Right prior to this, he did The Wrong Man, he did The Man Who Knew Too Much, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, and The Birds. It was like 5 of the greatest masterpieces in his entire career, all which will be shown in this series, by the way. And Rear Window right before that. So he could do no wrong, but he also got the sense that his films during the 1950s were becoming more and more serious and more psychologically complex, especially the films with James Stewart, Rear Window, and Vertigo especially. Those were popular with audiences up to a certain degree, not so much with Vertigo. And Vertigo was a really, really personal film to Hitchcock. And when it did not do well at the box, it's now considered one of the greatest films ever made, but it didn't do well at the box office. Critics didn't like it. Nobody really understood it. It seemed too slow to audiences in 1958. And he wanted to sort of change the record a little bit. He wanted to get back to the Hitchcock that he felt audiences loved and adored, specifically his spy chase films, sort of like the 39 Steps, Saboteur. I mean, this was sort of his bread and butter, how he got his start. Always the innocent man accused of a murder, he's been framed, and he has to race against time, race against the police and the villains to to clear his name before he's arrested by the police or before he's killed by the villains. This is a formula that Hitchcock used at least 12 times throughout his career, and it's what audiences really gravitated toward. I don't know if you've ever seen The 39 Steps, but that's a classic British film by Hitchcock, and in many ways this is North by Northwest is a remake of that. It's really a very, very similar story. So he was trying to go back to that, and after the exhaustion of working on Vertigo and the disappointment of it not doing well, this was sort of a breath of fresh air. He was bringing back the old Hitchcock that he knew would do well at the box office. And if you look at this film and you know his previous films, everything is here. He has a case of mistaken identity. I mean, that's his big theme throughout all of his movies, mistaken identity. I mean, just by lifting his finger at that one split second to hail the bellboy, it was when the bad guys were trying to find George Kaplan, and for that moment, he was mistaken, and everything hinges on that. Hitchcock loved that, when the fickle finger of fate, as they used to say on that show, Laughing, points towards somebody, and they're not equipped to handle it, but they have to, because otherwise they're going to get killed. I mean, so many times this movie has been compared to James Bond, to 007, and let me just read you something that I just came across recently. It says that, Cary Grant was 55 when he made this movie. At 55, he's completely believable as a romantic hero, so convincing that apparently Ian Fleming wanted Cary Grant to play 007 when Dr. No was filmed 3 years later, since he had Cary Grant in mind when he created James Bond in the first place. Grant refused, saying he was by then too old, even though in 1963 he basically plays the same role as he does in North by Northwest and Stanley Donen's Charade. But either way, there's so many things that happen in this movie, North by Northwest, that look toward the James Bond movies. When he's being chased by the crop duster, a very early Bond film, I think From Russia with Love, he's being chased by a helicopter that's also trying to strafe him. His scenes with Eva Marie Saint are more complexly written than usually you encounter in a James Bond film. But she is very much in the spirit of a Bond heroine. She's platinum blonde. Grace Kelly was his favorite actress. She made 4 films with him, 3 or 4 films with him. But he hadn't quite recovered from the fact that she had abandoned him to become Princess Grace help me out. Monaco. And so he was trying to recreate the next Grace Kelly. And you see that in the actresses who follow after Grace Kelly, Eva Marie Saint and Tippi Hedren. I think that he deliberately tried to turn Eva Marie Saint basically into Grace Kelly in this movie. If you've seen early Eva Marie Saint films like On the Waterfront, and, night and day from the role she's playing in North by Northwest. She usually played working class, characters, not elegant or urbane. But Hitchcock saw something in her and insisted that he was going to take her on and turn her into this glamorous movie star. If you've seen Vertigo, and I'll end on this, in Vertigo, the film he made right before North by Northwest, there's an infamous scene where James Stewart, drags Kim Novak to a clothing store and forces her, to try on different clothing to look like his dream image.
A gray suit.
Right, and that's exactly what Hitchcock did with Eva Marie Saint. He had the good fortune of having Edith Head as his costume designer. Hitchcock always used the same people. We call him an auteur, and he is, because Psycho cannot be more different from North by Northwest, but they're still unmistakably a Hitchcock film. But he couldn't have done it without his loyal compadres like Bernard Herrmann, the soundtrack, Robert Burks, the cinematographer, Edith Head doing costumes. But he didn't have Edith Head he didn't have her services when he had Eva Marie Saint. So Hitchcock took Eva Marie Saint on a flight across the U.S. from Hollywood to New York City. He took her to Bergdorf Goodman, which you see the purse in the film, and he basically dressed her according to his own possibly perverse specifications. And he turned her into his idea of what this dream character looked like. And it's exactly what James Stewart had done in Vertigo. Let me just end with this last observation. Speaking of James Stewart and Cary Grant, these were his two favorite actors, Hitchcock's favorite actors. Each appeared in a Hitchcock film 4 times. To me, and to a lot of other critics, they represent two sides of the coin, two sides of the same coin of Hitchcock, Hitchcock's personality. James Stewart's films, James Stewart, Rear Window, Vertigo, Man Who Knew Too Much, Rope. He plays sort of an everyman, sort of a sweaty, psychologically complex character, you know, who's a voyeur. In Rear Window, he like spies on his neighbors across the courtyard. In Vertigo, you know, he's sadomasochistic and sexually perverse. I mean, these were really complicated movies for Hitchcock. So Stewart, I think, represented Hitchcock. I mean, that was Hitchcock. In many ways, he was a voyeur, and he was also fascinated with his leading ladies, and sometimes obsessed unnaturally with them. But I think he poured a lot of his anxieties into the character of James Stewart, whereas Cary Grant's 4 pictures, To Catch a Thief, Suspicion, Notorious, and North by Northwest, they're much lighter. Notorious isn't so light, but the other 3 are almost like light romantic comedies. And to Hitchcock, Cary Grant represented his fantasy figure, someone he aspired to be, that he knew he could never be. Hitchcock once said, he was quoted saying that he was in love with Cary Grant, with Cary Grant's character, Cary Grant himself, however you want to interpret that. But so Cary Grant represents the fantasy side of Hitchcock, and Stewart is the more realistic side. And I'll just end by saying, I know I've said that 3 times. Cary Grant is such a total movie star in this movie. I mean, even if you've seen other Cary Grant films, I mean, he was such a wonderful actor because he could do screwball comedies like with Howard Hawks, Bringing Up Baby, but he also did Hitchcock so well. And I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? What was the last thing I was saying about Cary Grant?
Cary Grant was a movie star.
Oh yeah,
He had a great range.
Complete movie star. I mean, think about the abuse he goes through in this movie. I mean, he's forced to drink gallons of scotch. He's put into a car drunk. That scene is hilarious. His drunk scene. I mean, he is punched, knocked out twice. He's shot with blanks. He's shot with real machine guns. And yet, you know, he carries himself with aplomb. His gray suit, maybe, you know, it's magical and it protects him, but, you know, it does pretty well too. Yeah, I just think, to me, this is the ultimate Hitchcock film. I'll just end with that. Ironically, he goes to Psycho in his next movie. He really changes directions, and we're going to show that, I think, in October. He was always trying to outdo himself. He was very innovative as a director. So even though he was copying himself with North by Northwest, you know, he was also expanding on it, and always trying to keep audiences, make them unexpected. No one expected him to do Psycho, a black and white, inexpensive shocker, following North by Northwest, but he wanted to keep his audiences on their feet. The title of this film series, The Anticipation of Fear, to me is directly related to North by Northwest. Hitchcock said, to him the essence of fear and suspense is 2 people are talking to themselves they're having a conversation, and there's a time bomb underneath their table. And nobody knows the time bomb is there, except for the audience. If the audience knows the time bomb is there, they're in suspense, wanting to know when is that bomb gonna go off. You know, they're on the edge of their feet, they're biting their nails. He said, that's the secret of my sauce, you know, to keep them in anticipation. Think about the Cropbuster sequence, how before you see any action whatsoever, there's about 10 minutes of him just standing there in the silence. Also, Bernard Herrmann, the great composer, shuts off the music for that entire sequence. There's no music until the moment that the airplane hits the gas tank, and then the music explodes. But just that, you know, it's like 10 minutes of just sitting there waiting for something to happen. And that was so unusual, you know, for a Hitchcock film and also for a movie in the 1950s. It, you know, just stops time for a while and makes the audience very, very nervous. That's opposed to the shock, you know, in Psycho, during the shower scene, that is shock as opposed to suspense because you don't expect it. So that's not to say he didn't do that sometimes, but his main, his main way of creating suspense, his modus operandi, was to just stretch out time. You know, and nothing really is plausible in this movie. I mean, there's no way. Why did they draw him all the way out there to the middle of Indiana? They're going to kill him, but they're going to choose to kill him with a biplane and a machine gun. I mean, all they had to do was drive up and anyway. That's why it's a movie. I know. I'm sorry I talked so long. I would love to take some questions or comments. Let's give it 5 or 10 minutes, please. I won't take it personally if you leave. I know how I am. Yes, Jim.
Can you talk about the two little funny things I've heard about the movie? The kid was holding.
Did anyone notice that?
The what?
This is a scene, okay, right before she shoots him. And I've seen, okay, when I taught this movie, I always told students, okay, watch the scene. She's pointing the gun at Cary Grant in the Mount Rushmore cafeteria. Anyone been there? And there's a little boy sitting about 2 tables behind, and right when she picks up the gun, before she shoots, if you look closely, you don't even have to look closely, it's very apparent. There's a little boy who puts his fingers in his ears because he knows the blank gun is going off, and Hitchcock left that in, or else he missed it. I like to think I don't know. I don't know if there's a mistake or his intention. You know, this was the era, you know, before I started using my 8mm camera on a viewfinder. You couldn't rewind the tape, right? So he didn't think audiences would catch it because he didn't think audiences were going to go back and watch the movie 15 times.
So
Yes.
related to what you're saying about Cary Grant being a movie star, talk about the age difference between him and his mother.
Yeah. they were
In real life.
Yeah, they were born the same year. Her name was, help me out. Yeah, she's really good. She plays Grace Kelly's mother in To Catch a Thief. She famously stubs out her cigarette in her omelet. Hitchcock, you know, he had a love-hate relationship with food. So there's a lot of violence toward food in the movie. Let me say, the Bernard Herrmann music, again, he used the same people from movie to movie. Let me mention Robert Boyle, who was his art director. And let's think about the magic he created for this movie. Do you really think that Hitchcock dragged his crew to Mount Rushmore and shot those scenes? I mean, he did shoot the scenes from the observation deck, but the parks, not the Parks and Rec, the National Park, whatever they're called, the one that Trump has shut down. They didn't want Hitchcock filming a scene of violence on a national monument. They thought it would be a desecration toward the honor of the presidents. So, but Hitchcock never planned to have dangle Cary Grant. By the way, the original title for this movie, before he chose the Shakespearean, title North by Northwest, which comes from Hamlet actually, but his original title for the movie, when he was sort of just musing how, oh, let's have a movie about two guys chasing each other across Mount Rushmore, he said the title for the movie will be The Man in Lincoln's Nose. That's a fact. That is a fact. He went with that title for a year or two until the studio said, yeah. Then he went with Breathless. And he found out that this director named Jean-Luc Godard was directing a movie for the French New Wave, so he couldn't use Breathless. And then Ernest Lehman said, well, because the movie starts in New York and he goes toward Grand Rapids, Rapid City, South Dakota, it's in a northwesterly direction. Let's call the movie In a Northwesterly Direction. And I think the closer they got to the movie, toward the release, someone pointed out that Hamlet says, I'm but mad north by north, or north-northwest. And so they, that's a great title. So they use that. This is the way things happen, completely accidental. Any other? Yeah. Yes.
So just speaking of accidental or deliberate, does Lehman, the quote toward the end when they're walking toward the plane, seems straight out of Casablanca? And I'm wondering if that's a deliberate sort of invocation, right? I mean, it's an inverse.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But you know, they're leaving the structure, and then they're walking toward the plane. To some extent, you know, there's a romance interest.
Yeah.
She's looking back.
I didn't think about that so much, but since you, definitely, I can see that a little bit of Casablanca. But let me talk about, since you mentioned it, the other scene where they're walking toward the plane, where Cary Grant is walking with Leo G. Carroll.
Yeah.
Who, the guy, the spy master, the one who says, oh, FBI, CIA, we're all part of the same alphabet soup. He holds the record for most Hitchcock films. I think he's in 6 Hitchcock. Never the leading man, but he's always playing that sort of dour, dull person. But he is explaining this complicated plot to Cary Grant on the tarmac. And for like 30 seconds, as he's telling Cary Grant the really important stuff, we can't hear a goddamn word he's saying because of the sound of the plane. This is what Hitchcock called the MacGuffin. I know if you're a Hitchcock fan, you probably know about the MacGuffin. Hitchcock would always say the MacGuffin is something he invented. He said it's what the spies are trying to kill each other for and the audience don't care about. So they usually just like, whatever. It's like Mission Impossible, you know, like they're after something. You know, it doesn't make sense what they're after. This one has something to do with microfilm and a statue, which is what they're bidding on at the auction, which is such a fantastic scene. And that's a complete MacGuffin. It's something the audience just doesn't. You know, what does it mean? But it's an engine, you know, a reason for the good guys to be after the bad guys and vice versa. What did you think? I'm so into the look of this film, the beautiful glowing Technicolor. The guy who shot this film was Hitchcock's cinematographer for like 15 movies in a row. I mean, he shot Psycho after this, which looks totally different. The nighttime scenes in this movie just look so. When I call this film a fantasy, I'm also referring to the way it looks. You know, nighttime scenes in Technicolor don't look anything like real nighttime scenes. And there's just a look to this film that kind of adds, I think, to its fantastical side. What did you think of the auction scene, since I brought it up? To me, that's one of the funniest scenes in Hitchcock's career.
I was gonna
And that's something. I'll go to you in a second.
Oh,
But that's something that's underrated about Hitchcock, his humor. I mean, I look upon this more as a comedy, you know, than a thriller, even though it's considered, you know, one of his greatest thrillers. But I hear more laughter in the audience than gasps. Yes.
When you mentioned the auction scene, so what's your take on there are a lot of
$12.
Hitchcock ripoffs?
$15.
No, a lot of contemporary ripoffs. Because I was thinking, I don't know who directed it. It's called The Prize with Paul Newman.
I've never seen that.
L.P. Summer.
Yeah, about the Nobel
They
Prize.
steal the auction scene.
Oh.
They just repurpose it. But are you familiar with a lot of these where people said, well, we'll just do what Hitchcock did last year?
Well, they do that all the time. I mean,
And
there's
what's
a
your
whole
take
there's a
on
whole industry of movies that are influenced or copycats of Hitchcock. I mentioned that Cary Grant film, Charade. I mean, that's a pretty good faux Hitchcock film. I mean, of course, Brian De Palma. That's how he basically got his start in the '70s, making interesting De Palma homages. But yeah, I think that auction scene is almost an homage to like screwball comedy, movies made in the 30s and 40s. No one mentioned Martin Landau in this movie. I mean, that's kind of interesting twist of that character. I mentioned last week or a month ago when I was discussing Strangers on Trade how Hitchcock was really interested in I don't know what to call it, queer coding, and any characters that were portrayed as gay in a 1940s or 50s film was automatically coded as sinister or evil or not to be trusted. And Hitchcock talked to Martin Landau about whether to put that little side angle to his character, and Martin Landau was very much into it. And it didn't get that recognized in the 1950s, but now it seems pretty obvious. And it's just an interesting little thing that Hitchcock did. I don't know if you have one thing. It's the next film I'm doing in the series is Rope next month. Where it becomes a lot more serious in terms of the coding, so to speak. Does anyone have any last question or comment? Yes.
Didn't Martin Landau say, my woman's
intuition?
Yeah.
He says that. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Right,
It's an unusual thing to say in a 1950s movie,
Yeah.
especially. But Hitchcock always wanted to keep his audience sort of little, off the. I don't know what to say. Any last thing?
Sam,
Yes.
as someone who taught college students for decades,
Yes.
what would be kind of the 3 Hitchcock films that I could maybe get my children into Hitchcock?
I normally would have said North by Northwest, but I think this is his longest film, actually. North by Northwest is, in terms of running time, it's his longest film. Although it doesn't seem that long. I mean, Vertigo is shorter, but it seems longer. I would say, how old are these kids?
Well, college students.
Oh,
I'm
college
not saying,
students. Because I was going to say Psycho, but then I was thinking, wait a minute, if it's a 10-year-old.
That's what I.
Although, I mean, as a 10-year-old, no problem. I would have had my 8mm camera, my viewfinder. So I was deconstructing movies at age 10. I would say Rear Window, because Rear Window, I mean, that's going to show in 2 or 3 months. To me, that's maybe Hitchcock's best, or I think it's one of his greatest films, 2 or 3. And it's so interesting to watch today because it's all about the invasion of privacy when someone had like binoculars. I mean, today when students, with their iPhones, it's really interesting to look at Rear Window in the context of social media today. But I would say Rear Window, I would say Psycho, and I got to say The Birds. If these are college students, usually my students always love The Birds. In fact, one class I had less than 20 students, and I was able to book our little micro cinema here, which only has 19 seats, and they got to see The Birds. I was a big screen, not as big as this screen. I think that's the best reason to see Hitchcock films now at this theater because of the big screen, just to see it. The color and just the look of it is dazzling.
I love that scene when he's running out of the UN and it's shot from the top down. And you see,
Oh, yeah.
It's like the buses.
So maybe this is a good way to end the discussion about how he pulled off his magic. Obviously, they didn't have CGI. They didn't have digital special effects of today. So it was all done with miniatures, with matte shots, you know, with animation even. And I think in that scene, I mean, I've seen that shot analyzed. It's only about 3 seconds, 4 seconds. You see a tiny little figure, you know, running out of the UN on the sidewalk to the cab, and I think that's the only actual real thing you're seeing. Everything else is like a matte shot, which is an enormous painting put into the back of the picture. You see that often when they're in the lobby of the UN. The UN would not allow Hitchcock to shoot in the UN, just like Mount Rushmore wouldn't allow him to, you know, have people flung off Washington's ear. The UN didn't want to have a diplomat, you know, stabbed in the back. So Hitchcock took secret shots, second unit shots outside of the UN, just as Cary Grant's getting out of the cab. And he had his second unit secretly shoot inside the UN just to get a sense of the lobby. And they recreated in the studio, the MGM studio. This is the only movie Hitchcock ever made for MGM. And he had like a full contract, final cut, everything he wanted. And they recreated the entire UN lobby in the studio, just as they created the Mount Rushmore. I was gonna mention that 15 minutes ago. Robert Boyle said, no problem, you can't film the final scene at Mount Rushmore. We don't want to endanger the actors. We will create Mount Rushmore in the studio. And that was all enormous rubber figures of the 4 presidents. And he has, you can see the production shots of Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint scrambling up and down these enormous sets. And even that looks dangerous. I mean, they're not even in Mount Rushmore, and even the set looked pretty dangerous. But that was all created, you know, handmade for this film. I find that remarkable also, to see these films that were just not made in a laboratory like today, but actually, you know, handmade, painting. And the crop dusting sequence, that's a combination of a stuntman. Sometimes you see from the back, it's not Cary Grant running, it was a stuntman. When he's in the cornfield or whatever, hiding when they pour the DDT down, that was obviously in the studio. And they used rear screen projection to show the crop duster. And sometimes you see Cary Grant really running for his life, it looks like, from a plane. I mean, so it's real stuff, animation, miniatures. The only thing I don't know is how they got the opening shot of the bus pulling in, because they didn't have drones in those days. It was too high to be a crane. I don't know how, unless, I thought maybe a helicopter, but it's a stationary shot, so I don't know how he shot that. You know?
Sorry, I just have a quick question. Do you know by chance what was used to simulate the pesticide and the crop dusting?
Oh, I don't know that. That's the one question I can't answer.
Damn it. It's obviously, I'm hoping it's non-toxic. Like maybe cornstarch or something, or baby, well, no, cornstarch.
I wonder how did Cary Grant, he got into that farmer's pickup truck, and nobody else followed after him? I have questions. Anyway, thank you very much. Rope is next month. Thank you very much for that.